All right, hello, metal maniacs. It's the Meista from Brews and Tunes. Cheers. I am absolutely thrilled. I'm so excited today. I am chatting with the one and only, the indelible Mr. Eric Clayton, of course, of the legendary Saviour Machine, and now his own solo work with a band called The Nine that he's been doing for the last several years. Excuse me, I've got a little yeah. Anyway, Eric, thank you so much for chatting with me today. I'm very, very excited to chat with you. This is great. How are you doing?
I'm doing great. Thank you, brother. Appreciate
Excellent.
you.
Excellent. Well, I guess first off, I want to congratulate you on I know it's been out for a few years now, and you've been doing some touring with it. But your solo album, A Thousand Scars, what a beautiful, masterful album that is. I mean, what an incredible musical journey. I mean, just really amazing.
Thank you.
Yeah,
Thanks.
I mean, just really incredible music on that album. And I mean, it's heartfelt, it's emotive, it's honest. It's just really beautiful, really touching, really powerful. I mean, it just kind of full. I mean, it's really a journey, and it's not an album for me anyway. I've always been an album guy. It's something that as soon as I start listening, like, I have to listen to the entire album. I can't listen to a song here, or it's not I mean, even though they're great singles on the album, for me it's a concept piece that has to be listened to in its entirety, preferably with a frosty beer.
It is indeed. I guess the album itself. The album itself, I suppose, is a kind of dying art form.
Hmm.
With music headed the way it's headed. Suppose it has been for quite some time, but yeah, I'm right there with you, brother. There's something about albums that tell a story, and in the end, we're all fascinated by good stories, right?
Yeah.
You know, whether it's through music or through film or through literature or poetry, whatever. Ballet. Pick your sport. Um, there you go. Rolling my sleeves up, digging in here.
All right.
um, yeah, brother. I thank you first of all, and I'm just blown away by the response, considering it was an independent project all the way through, and yeah, it's a challenging record. It's not a record that these days it's an 80-minute album, first of all, which is
Right.
these days it's a lot to ask somebody to sit and listen to an album that's twice as long as the average album they're used to listening to. I guess that's still 40 minutes is still your average album, I suppose.
Yeah. Yeah.
But it's already a lot to ask, and then you have all these heavy themes that are connected to a lifetime. It's an autobiographical record, as you said. It's a very transparent album, the most transparent thing I've ever done, and kind of took me 20 years to kind of walk a journey to make it.
Yeah.
And to be able to go through it, to live it, and then produce it. And
was that in terms of just something so personal? I would imagine that was, to create this album anyway, to create music it's not an easy task necessarily, but to put something out there that's so, it's exposing who you are in a lot of ways. Was that difficult? Was that a difficult decision?
I suppose it, again, like, maybe it took 20 years to kind of to make it happen, I suppose. It's really kind of crazy to think that between 2001, which was the last kind of official Saviour Machine release before things blew up, that was 2001 was the last time that I released an original album, an album of original music. And between 2001 and 2020, the release of A Thousand Scars, a lot happened in between. I disappeared and went through a whole crazy thing, and but main point being, for about 19 years, there was nothing new. Some re-releases, some remixes, some reimaginings of some of the legend material, and commemorative things along the way and things like that. But the Bowie tribute, that was about the only thing that I, you know, and that was definitely the only. That's another part of the story for sure, and we'll get to that for sure when you want to talk about the Bowie thing. But yeah, it basically took 19 years to get original music out of me again after the let's say SMPTSD that I was going through.
Right. Yeah.
That's my term. I should coin that.
Yeah, you should.
Post-traumatic stress syndrome. It's
Yeah.
real, people. But yeah. So been 19 years to almost 20 years since I released something new, and so, like, to answer your question directly, it was difficult to get out, but once it started coming out, brother, it was the most organic thing that I've ever experienced as an artist.
Nice.
And so much of an outpouring and such a natural process of the songs coming together, and that almost frightening on certain levels. Like, wow, it's not supposed to be this easy, but it was in so many ways. It just came together in a really beautiful way, and yeah, I guess I'm just thankful that a few thousand people have had a chance to hear it. You know?
Yeah, it's incredible. It's such a brilliant record.
Thank you.
And what I love about it is it definitely has, you know, some of the elements that of your music from the early era of you know, like Saviour Machine, you know, kind of that progressive sound. But then there's so much more happening as well. Like you know, I mean, there's some really
arrangements as well.
Really beautiful haunting movements, and then some really powerful, aggressive, you know, heavy heavy metal. It's just a really phenomenal album. Yeah,
thank you so much for that.
And I would imagine, you know, as you mentioned, you know, this 20 years, and you said that it, you know, once it started flowing, I mean, and for lack of a better term, because you probably had all this pent up emotion and musical, you know, artistry that you needed to get out. You know, it had been so long. I'm sure you were, you know, kind of, you know, even if it was subconscious, you know, just chomping at the bit to be back on the stage again. I would imagine in a lot of ways, you know, both physically and metaphysically, and you know.
That's what led to me wanting to work with a band again. I just moved to Europe, and all of a sudden I was writing this album. I was like, I need a band. I'm going to write this record basically myself and with a few people close, you know, my brother and a very good friend in Minneapolis, and yeah, and then with the band that I, you know, put together. The Nine was I say put together. I didn't put them together. They were already put together. That's the irony. Is like you said, you know, just reconnecting with all of it. One of those main things was reconnecting with the band, and I tried for a year to put a German band together, basically between my poor German skills at the time and yeah, language barriers and just general communication barriers. And I realized that putting a super group together, some sort of, you know, hand-picked musicians to put a group together, wasn't what I wanted. I wanted something that felt like a group, felt like a band, and felt like guys that knew each other. And then, yeah, this band just kind of dropped out of the sky through a friend, through a friend of a friend, and yeah, he made an introduction. This 90s cover band, they were playing a bunch of Soundgarden and Alice in Chains and stuff like that, and
oh wow,
and they'd lost their singer and were kind of bored, and I was a singer looking for a band, and yeah, they were their band name, their cover band name was called Les Nefties. It's like a French, Belgian, Dutch thing. It means the nine, basically, in French, I think. And yeah, so it was just kind of there. It's like, well, I love the number 9. It's my favorite number, and so that's we're going to be Eric Clayton and the Nine.
Nice.
But that's a long way of getting to this record, 1,000 Scars. One of the reasons why it feels like it does is there's real people involved, and real human beings that spent a year with the music as well, and kind of working out things and finding their places in the music as well.
Yeah, you can tell by listening to it that it was you know, definitely a passion project, and that you took your time and the band took their time. It it feels very organic. And I mean, the writing alone is incredible. I mean, your vocals, as always, are unmatched. Just incredible vocals. And for anybody who hasn't heard you, one of the things that always attracted me to your voice was there's definitely this David Bowie-esque vibe, and then metal, especially kind of a progressive metal element to it as well, which is fascinating because I remember as a kid, I grew up listening to David Bowie from a young age, and I remember I always wanted him to do heavier music just because I was a metalhead and I loved David. And so when I discovered Saviour Machine, it was like, here it is. Like, I mean, you have your own style and your own voice, but I mean, there is that.
I hate to interrupt because actually, I'm not going to. I'm going to interject and then let you take this back because I love what you just brought up. This is fascinating. I don't think I've ever had this come up in any sort of interview or conversation for that matter. But I think whether I realize it or not, I wanted the same thing. I was such a huge fan of Bowie's work in the 70s, 1970 to 1980 in particular, that decade, which I believe was just instrumental in basically creating genres and genres of music. I mean, legions of musicians and other artists inspired by his work between 1970 and 1980, album after album after album. And the chameleon, changes and all that. It's like he said it from the beginning and basically set a template for what he wanted to do, and this identity thing, and kind of reinvent himself again and again, artistically, fashion-wise, all that stuff. And it's fascinating what he did in the 70s.
Yeah.
And the 70s was a weird decade to navigate, I'm sure, as far as pop culture and all of that, But you brought up this desire to want to have more heaviness in Bowie stuff. And when I was a young Bowie fan, like 81, 82, 83, those early parts of the 80s, like right around the time Let's Dance came out, it was like, oh, it's a good pop album, but man, I'm missing that kind of heavy Bowie stuff, that weird Bowie stuff that I really love. And so in the 80s, I kind of fell away from Bowie. I probably like a lot of diehard Bowie fans, it wasn't his greatest decade, as far as creatively. And it was the one time where he kind of did an un-Bowie thing for a while, for a decade or so. Cocaine's a weird drug,
Yeah.
But as I kind of lost my thing for Bowie and kind of held on to 70s Bowie, and then started discovering other things in the 80s, I started finding myself, and my brother Jeff in particular, who was a huge Sabbath fan.
Yeah.
My brother Jeff, same thing, kind of felt that same pull that the desire you had, the desire I had, my brother had as well. Like, man, I love when Bowie does heavy stuff. And me and Jeff and Dean, the three founding members of Saviour Machine, might find this interesting. The first 2 years of Saviour Machine, we were obsessed with 2 records, 2 albums. Sabbath, the first Sabbath album, and both albums released in 1970, ironically. The first Sabbath album, and David Bowie's The Man Who Sold the World.
Oh, cool.
And if you go back and listen to The Man Who Sold the World today, it's by far Bowie's heaviest record. It's his most proto-metal album. The record, you could say, it's almost, there's Sabbath. You listen to certain parts of Man Who Sold the World, it's right there, man. It's pretty heavy stuff, know. Those 2 albums were definitely a nucleus in creating the beginning of Saviour Machine, and maybe that's how it happened right there.
Oh, interesting. Yeah, I never. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense, and it's
Sabbath.
Yeah, and it's interesting because there's wow, that's really, sorry, I'm
no, it's kind
lost for words now. It's like, I totally agree with you. Yeah, I can see that. I can totally see, and I know, and I always knew that you were a Bowie fan, and I knew that you and Jeff were fans of Black Sabbath, but I guess I never kind of put it all together really until you said like those 2 albums. I'm like, wow, yeah, I can see that now.
It's kind of the birth of Saviour Machine, and then if you pepper in a healthy dose of the Doors, we especially me, I was listening to a lot of Jim Morrison during the late 80s, and yeah, a lot of Pink Floyd, you
Hmm.
know.
Yeah.
Those were kind of side influences as well. And I remember when in the early days of Saviour Machine, a lot of people compared us to Queensryche, and I always kind of thought that's kind of weird. I understand it, but more today. At the
Yeah.
time, I didn't understand it because I always thought we were much darker than Queensryche, and especially early Saviour Machine was almost more like progressive punk rock in some sort of way. We were
Yeah.
just learning how to play, and it was like, like if you listen to our demo from 1990, I remember people listen to our demo going, "Yeah, you guys kind of sound like Queensryche," and I'm like, I don't hear it,
Hmm.
but a little later on, let's say when Mind Crime was what was that 89 or 88 or
Yeah,
7?
right around there. I have a I'm
Maybe even
terrible with
87.
years. Yeah.
Maybe it had something to do with the conceptual thing. We were getting this Queensryche comparison early on, and I think it had something to do with the fact that we wore long black clothes on stage, and they were wearing black coats and stuff by that point. I think in the late 80s, early 90s as well, or right
Yeah.
around that time. Um, I had this kind of operatic kind of voice. Maybe there was some sort of connection there, but I think it had to do with theme. Queensryche, the idea of the concept, the concept album, this between the Warning and Mind Crime, they had kind of established that they were doing some concept albums, and
Right.
and there weren't a lot of bands that were doing so many concept albums during that time, late 80s. It had kind of fallen off as far as
Yeah.
I remember.
Well, you had
And
such a kind of a, especially with the grunge movement, kind of,
sure,
anything that was overblown or what they, what people
right,
deemed overblown was everybody was
right.
kind of against that. So, a lot
It's
of
too
the,
artsy, it's too pretentious, it's too,
yeah,
yeah, all that
yeah,
stuff.
which is interesting because there was such a, and I know, and I hate putting labels on things, but sometimes it's just easier to do it, I guess, and to try to describe something to somebody. But yeah, that was one thing with your band is it was almost kind of that part of that neo-progressive movement that happened, with like Dream Theater and Spock's
Right,
Beard, bands like that.
Fate's Warning, stuff
Yeah,
like that,
Fate's
right?
Warning.
Yeah,
Yeah.
sure.
Yeah. So but you guys always had such an interesting and different take
Guess it was
musically.
a little
Yeah,
gothier, you know.
yeah. There was definitely a gothic element. There was, like I was always curious. In fact, I'm glad you bring. I always wanted to ask you if you, yeah, did you listen to Bauhaus? Did you? Because there's some of that element, I think, to
You know
some
what?
degree.
Yeah, you know what? I started listening to some of the more gothy stuff through Dean Forsyth, our bass player.
Hmm.
Dean was the one who kind of, because I was Mr. Late 60s psychedelic rock guy and early 70s Bowie, and yeah, I like my late 60s, early 70s stuff still to this day. Most of my favorite stuff comes from that period. As
Cool.
far as like stranded on a desert island, if you only had this many records to listen to, and from about 1967 to 75, there's a lot of them, you know.
Nice.
And but Dean was the one who turned me on to a lot of that goth stuff, and the way that he did it was like, well, Bauhaus, they're hugely influenced by Bowie, and Sisters of Mercy, hugely influenced by Bowie, Susie and the Banshees, hugely influenced by Bowie, and basically just the Cult, all these bands, and just like, yeah, it turned me on to kind of that scene, and I was kind of more into the mood. I liked the mood of it, and I like the fact, hey, some of these guys sing a lower voice, a little closer to my kind of range and that sort
Yeah.
of thing. And yeah, I think the kind of imagery, the kind of vampirish kind of imagery of the late 80s, the goth scene at the time was kind of vampy,
Yeah.
at least around LA. And it was definitely before it got all bondagey like it did in the 90s, you know what I mean?
Right. Yeah. Yeah. It was very Anne Rice
Right,
in
yeah,
the
right.
'80s.
It went from the flowy to the
Yeah.
can't walk in your pants stuff,
Right. That's funny.
But yeah, the culture kind of moved that way as well. That's interesting. Just from
Yeah.
a bit more flowy to a little more kind of, yeah, interesting.
Did
But
you and Jeff and Dean, did you, like, when you guys started the band, did you have kind of an idea of what you wanted to sound like? Because it's such an interesting, your sound was so interesting and so different from anything really that was going on at the time, in my opinion. It was such a, I mean, you guys were, truly original. And so I always wondered, like, I mean, obviously, the influences that we've talked about, but I mean, did you all sit down at some point and just say, okay, this is what we want to sound like? Or did it just sort of happen?
Maybe a little bit of both, but probably more of the just happen
Hmm.
kind of thing. My brother, I think Jeff was 17 when we first started writing songs together. I was
Oh, wow.
21, I think, you know, and Dean was 20. And yeah, when we first started writing songs, even before the band was called Saviour Machine, we were writing under a couple of different band names before that, and had 3 or 4 different drummers and had a couple of different keyboard players, and we played a few gigs under a couple of different band names. But from the time we started writing as Saviour Machine, as okay, this is the band name that's going to stick. This is our band name, taken, of course, from the Man Who Sold the World, the Bowie
Yeah.
album. What an evocative song to this day, lyrically and thematically, and yeah, what a just found it's like Sabbath took their name again. There's the Bowie Sabbath connection. Sabbath took their name from an old movie,
Yeah.
and we thought, why not take our name from an old obscure David Bowie track that nobody knows about,
Yeah. Yeah.
but people should, you know.
Yeah.
Um, I'm sorry, I got spun off on something. Bring me back on point here. It happens sometimes.
No, this is great. Yeah, just kind of how you guys created the sound,
That's it.
how that
Yeah,
came
that
together.
you were asking about, like, most of it came out of, I think, just trial and error, and like 3 guys that between Dean's musical influences were kind of interesting. He had a lot of metal influences, but also a lot of this kind of goth scene influences. So Dean,
Hmm.
and it was ironic because Dean was a very, very good lead guitar player, and the original version of Saviour Machine. I don't know how often I've talked about this, but the original version of Saviour Machine was Dean Forsyth on lead guitar, my brother on rhythm guitar,
Oh.
and we went through like 6 different bass players. We couldn't find a bass player, and we were going through more bass players than drummers,
Hmm.
and so finally Dean was a very good prototype, the school of Randy Rhoads. I mean, Randy Rhoads was his guy, and so Dean learned how to play guitar from listening to Randy Rhoads, basically,
Wow.
and was tasty and had chops and could have easily been a guitar hero, um, and but for the good of the band and for the vibe of what the 3 of us had going together musically, Dean Dean stepped into the bass role, and when he stepped into the bass role, he kind of had to kind of look at his instrument like, yeah, totally differently now, different instrument, and Dean, I think the goth music, the goth stuff, the Cure, bands like Sisters and the Cure and Bauhaus and Susie and yeah, early Cult stuff like that. I think those were partially an influence on how Dean became the bass player he became as well. You
Hmm.
know,
Yeah, that
this
makes sense.
melodic idea, but this kind of feel gothy thing as well. And my brother's Tony Iommi influences with David Gilmour and pepper in a little bit of the Edge, and you have my brother. Basically, that's kind of like Jeff Clayton prototype guitar sound back in those Saviour Machine days.
Yeah.
Comes from basically that. It's Tony Iommi meets Gilmour meets the Edge. That's kind of where, you know, yeah, for Jeff.
Yeah, that makes sense. Well, I would imagine too, like the writing, the music, probably shaping that around your vocals, especially this deeper baritone,
It's so
kind of
funny how that.
haunting voice. I mean, I'm sure they had to kind of shape their music around that a little bit, and I think it lends itself well to especially the Black Sabbath influence, and the goth influence. Yeah, that really works really well. I'm sure probably some of that was unconscious, just leveraging off of your sound. Um,
We would warm up, when bands get together and you're fooling around before you start going through your set list or before you start working on whatever you're working on, we'd warm up with bad covers of Bowie stuff, and we'd always end up with a couple of Sabbath in there, NIB or War Pigs, and every once in a while we'd end up, on something really dark like Black Sabbath, and yeah, it was a thing in early Saviour Machine days where we would break into like just the first few bars, first let's say 3 or 4 vocal lines of Black Sabbath, with me doing the vocal 3 octaves lower than Ozzy does on the on the what is this, like way down there, and
Oh, wow.
it is doomy as fuck, man. I mean, and we always really, even in those early rehearsals, just me singing that stuff with this big deep voice. Yeah, Jeff and Dean and I knew right then, like, man, this should have happened, man. Bowie should have fronted Sabbath. There should have been a band,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Someday. Did you guys ever record any of the Sabbath stuff? Are there recordings out, the demos out there that you guys did?
You know what? No demos. We never, just, I don't know. There might be cassettes of old rehearsals somewhere, buried somewhere, rehearsals, stuff like that, but probably not.
Yeah.
There's some footage in a documentary that I'm working on right now. Actually, I'm working on cutting footage. I'm still in the editing phase at the moment, but going through about 36 hours of footage from 1993.
Oh, wow.
And 30 years ago, when we signed our first record deal and made our first record, and when it was released and all that. It was a crazy year for us. It was released into the Christian music scene in America, and people freaked out, and it just turned into this crazy, controversial, wacky year. And 30 years later, going through all this footage that I taped everything back then. I had a little JVC camera, and it was like kind of compact for the time. It was like, man, this is handy. And I just filmed everything. First record, you're excited about it. You're like, it's like, no one's ever going to see this, but if I never make another record, I've got this documented.
Yeah, that's cool.
I filmed the recording of the record, from the day we loaded drums and into the studio to the day we finished final mixing and mastering, and I've got footage of the few tour dates we did, the few performances we did during that year, and yeah, just working on putting together an interesting documentary about a culture clash 30 years ago between a band that had a vision and a kind of unique sound that kind of came out of nowhere. And we thought, because of the themes that we were, we thought because of the themes, these kind of overtly heavy religious themes, that we were dealing with, and these spiritual themes and these ideas that we were putting forth. And yeah, we kind of thought that Christian America would be, we thought they'd be a little more receptive to it than they were.
Yeah.
And they just weren't at the time. It took them another decade before they came around. But in 1993, created quite a deal. And long story short, man, I was the Antichrist poster boy of Christian music for, well, about 4 years, until Marilyn Manson came along.
Yeah.
And then he just took over.
I remember. Yeah, you were. I mean, partly. I mean, one, because of your lyrics, then also because of your stage show. Very. You've always had a very cool visual presence. Very. You obviously.
That definitely being
aesthetic.
attributed. That is hugely attributed to Bowie's work, and of course, guys like go way back, like Syd Barrett, Peter Gabriel, early Genesis, Alice Cooper. Heck, man, you can even go all up to Kiss, man. I would say, as a little boy growing up in the 70s, I mean, I was 10 years old in 1977 when Alive 2 came out. That's an impressionable age, man.
Yeah.
they were like superheroes, man. It was like, it wasn't even music. It was like the superhero thing. And like they should have comic books. And, I saw it as well, and it was just like, it crossed. Gene Simmons knew what he was doing, man. When he put that together, it's like, kids are going to eat this shit up,
Right.
And we did, man. And so
yes,
it's interesting. I look at Kiss today, that looks good, brother. I don't want to lose my thought on Kiss, because you know what? This is organic. Kiss just played their last concert as human beings, and right?
Yeah.
We're going to see what happens with virtual kiss in the future. Um,
Yes.
but right,
Yeah.
it's wild. It's wild, but I'm not, man. I'm not going to step on the idea. It's ballsy. I want to see what happens. You
Yeah.
know, let's see what happens. If there were ever a band that could pull it off, and if there were ever a mastermind like Gene Simmons that was worthy of giving it a shot, yeah, let's see what happens. You know,
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah.
think about it, man. Like I said, when I was a kid, they were like comic book heroes anyway. So who's to say that they don't become by becoming virtual, they become virtual comic book heroes for generations to come. You know,
That's a good
it's
point.
it's visionary. You
Yeah.
know, it is. It's visionary for sure. Um, so back to Kiss back in the 70s. Um, I think Kiss was my gateway drug, man. If you really like, as a 10-year-old boy, that the idea that like rock and roll should be a show like that, that it should be something to look at. Um, as I got a little bit older, 12, 13, 14 years old, and they start getting turned on to a little bit more mature music or a little bit more heady stuff or whatever, a little artsier stuff. It's interesting how the early fascination with Kiss led to later fascination with David Bowie and Alice Cooper and Genesis and yeah, uh, other theatrical artists that influenced Kiss, you know?
Yeah.
And so, yeah, it all kind of, if you think about the prototypes of Kiss, I mean, there's definitely the foundations were laid by guys like Sid Barrett and Mark Bolan and David Bowie and Peter Gabriel, obviously, and as far as the theatricality of what they were doing, and even
Yeah.
guys like what's that man? What's that cat? Screaming, what was that dude? Arthur
Oh,
Brown. That dude
yeah.
was
Arthur
wild,
Brown.
you know.
Yeah.
Yeah, that dude was out there, man. That's definitely pre Gene Simmons stuff for sure, you know.
Yeah.
Um, but yeah, uh, Kiss was my gateway drug to, let's say, prog rock in a lot. It's funny
Hmm.
because Kiss inadvertently led me to Bowie and then to Genesis and then Genesis
Interesting.
led me to Pink Floyd and yeah, it's an interesting how all that happened.
Yeah. I guess I probably, I mean, I'm not a musician, but I probably took a somewhat similar path in some ways, I think, because I'm around the same age. And yeah, I remember being in the mall with my mom, and I was probably 5 or 6 years old, and there was a guy he had a kiosk, and he was selling Kiss t-shirts. And I remember
Right on.
begging for a kid, and my mom's like, "No, I'm not buying a 5-year old a Kiss t-shirt." I'm like, please, please, please.
That's
Um,
awesome.
but yeah, and I didn't know their music really at all. I just saw them and went, that is cool. Like you said, like, they look like superheroes. Like, I want that. I want in. What is this? I want in on
Right.
this. Um, yeah, and I think,
Yeah.
yeah, same sort of thing, kind of the same pathway where it led me into, as I got older, kind of headier music, as you
Like I said,
stated.
the gateway, they were my gateway drug into music, into
Yeah.
to a lot of metal, really, as well. Not just the prog stuff, but like Kiss led me to Van Halen and then to the Scorpions, and then from Van Halen, Scorpions to all kinds of stuff. You
Yeah.
know, I mean, really, I think about the early 80s for me, like growing up 13, 14 years old and junior high school, stuff like that. And my, I knew who Bowie was, but I really didn't discover Bowie until late 82.
Hmm.
Um, I was fascinated by a performance that I'd seen. I saw him in 1980 on Saturday Night Live. He performed "The Man Who Sold the World" in this strange kind of binding kind of jester costume. It was a strange. He also performed TBC 15 in a dress and
Oh, yeah.
one other track. It's a legendary performance. Martin. The reason I was watching the show that night is my mom was out and I was staying with this babysitter was basic and we were up late and this is like December, I want to say December 79 maybe, something like that, December 79 maybe. um I could be a year off, but I'm going to go with 79 because Apocalypse Now was in the theater at the time.
Okay. Yeah.
And I remember it's the first episode of Saturday Night Live I ever watched, and Martin Sheen was the host. They
Oh,
did
wow.
an Apocalypse Now parody skit and made me curious about the movie. Um, and David Bowie was a musical guest. So in that
Wow.
one evening in December of I want to say 79. So been a while, brother.
Yeah.
What's that, 44 years ago, something like that?
Yeah, that's horrifying. Yeah, when you start to
Um,
put numbers to it, it's
yeah, right.
scary.
That night, though, hugely influential in my life, in my artistic life. Apocalypse Now to this day is probably, yeah, it's top 5 films for me.
Oh yeah, brilliant.
And David Bowie, yeah, he's an integral part of so much as far as my musical identity even goes, and not so not even so much in the character or of my voice or the theatricality of what I do, but just in the spirit of where it comes from. You know what I mean? It's like the consummate artist, man,
Yeah.
constantly pushing himself, challenging his audience, and so forth. And it's quite a bar to try to live up to, but it's fun trying.
Yeah, yeah, and I think, and you've always been great at that. Especially unfortunately, I've never seen you live apart from footage, and over the years, and that's one thing that's always attracted me to your music as well, is that aesthetic that you have, that stage presence, and for lack of a better term, you're ballsy as hell. Like you get up there and do some crazy interesting things, and push the audience, make them think about things that maybe they don't want to think about sometimes. Especially, as you mentioned before, kind of, the Wayback Machine back in '93, performing, Saviour Machine, and, again, shaved your head, painted your head, and the use of flags, especially the American flag, which, is triggering for a lot of people. And which I'm sure you knew exactly what you were doing with that. So, but I thought it was brilliant. I thought it was, and it got you in trouble a few times, as you mentioned, with especially conservative Christians, were not happy by one with your lyrics, and then your stage shows really freaked them out.
I must have some sort of flag fetish, man. The flags have gotten me in a lot of trouble over the years. And then, of course, later in the 90s, 97, 98, we were doing a lot of touring over here in Europe, and I was pretty vocal about, some things on stage with, burning UN flags and dipping Israeli and Palestinian flags in blood, and, shouting things I was shouting from the stage. It must have sounded like some mad prophet,
Yeah.
Sure.
Well, and I think prophet is true. I mean, it's sadly, in some ways, I would say some of your music might be more relevant now than it was then, and which is frightening.
That's terrifying.
That we're in that same, I mean, I think, especially, I know you live in Germany now, but you look at the United States, and not to get too political, but with the Christian nationalists in the US, and which,
brother, man,
it's scary stuff.
Listen, people know who I am, what I believe. I think it's important that people who will profess, for lack of a better term, to be a Christian. I wish there was a better term for it, because I almost feel like I like the term believer. I'm a believer, man. I believe in a certain doctrine, in a certain truth that has given me the freedom to do what I do, and my faith has been such an instrumental part of my entire existence that I can't even. It's almost incomprehensible to me to imagine myself not a man of faith at this point. But I'll say this: Christian nationalism in America is fucking terrifying.
Yeah.
And there's a reason I moved over here when I did, man. The writing has been on the wall for a long time, but man, 2016, that whole the election and all that, man, just it's like between, really, is this what I got to choose from? This and that? That's it?
Yeah.
That whole thing, man. It's like, I think I'm gonna move to a country where they have 5 or 6 parties to choose from, man. This whole 2-party thing isn't working anymore,
Yeah.
And it's just, oh, brother, it wasn't it wasn't a political move. I moved over because I fell in love, and and I knew this is where I needed to come. But part of it was definitely connected to what was going on in America at the time. I just felt like, I don't know how else to say this other than, and I'm sure I'll offend someone on some side. There's really no way to walk this line, but I felt, let's see, what year, what was it 2000, was it 2008 that Obama became president the first time? Was that
Yes.
it?
Yeah, 2008.
In 2008, I felt, I don't know, for the first time in a long time, I got swept up in just the fact that it happened. It was just like, whoa, I never thought in my lifetime I'd ever see this,
Yeah.
that I'd see a black man in this position. And it was like, that blew my mind. It made me, it made me hopeful for America and hopeful for the future. And it was about the last time I remember feeling like that. And something happened, and it was, I remember bringing my kids in. My kids were pretty young at the time. I mean, yeah, preteens. And I remember bringing them in and just saying, hey, this is history, kids. I
Yeah.
never thought I'd see it in my lifetime. And what happened over the next 8 years in the country and in the soul of the country, in people's vernacular, the vocabulary, just all of it. It's like, I spent some of that time in Utah, which is it's a very red state, of course, but it's also a state filled with very beautiful people who basically just want to be left alone. You know, it's the Mormon culture is, yeah, it's Utah's theirs, and you go to Utah and it's and you just know it when you go in. It's like this is their place, and but you know what? If you're if you're respectful of the people and their culture, they're respectful of you. And I lived there as a guest for 3.5 years and felt very, very welcome there.
Hmm.
But even there, in a place that I consider, yeah, generally the people in Utah are good people, a lot of good people. Um, I felt a sense, even in a place like that, that oh my, the soul of this country is literally being torn to pieces right now. It's just like it's just rotten, and it's coming apart at the seams. And yeah, man, it's hard not to get emotional about it, man. It's the artist thing, man. I
Right.
feel everything sometimes.
Yeah.
And I wish more artists would admit that the reason we are who we are is because we fucking feel everything, man.
Right. Yeah.
And and tend to see things in a way that, yeah, it's like holding up a mirror sometimes. That's what art's supposed to do, right? Just hold up a mirror.
Right. Right.
Um, but
For
man,
me,
it got to
true
the
art
point
is a
where,
motive. It's
right. I felt stifled. 2016, by the time 16 came around, and I'd been living in Utah for 3.5 years by that point. When I left in 2017, by the time I left in 2017, after that last year, 2016 was just I saw it in kids, man. I was coaching kids. Basically, I was working 12 hours a day teaching kids how to hit baseballs and softballs.
Hmm.
You know,
Wow.
that's kind of a side passion, and it has been for years, is hitting instructor and anything baseball or softball related with youth.
Was this in
And
Salt Lake?
I was in St. George, brother,
Oh, St.
down in
George. Oh,
California.
okay.
Right. Yeah. Since St. George, and St. George was my home for 3.5 years between 2014 and 2017, basically.
Okay.
And but even there, brother, I could just feel it in that short time I was leaving California my whole life. I spent my whole life in Cali, brother. And man, when I left Cali at the end of 2013, 10 years ago, I'm not the first artist to let's say talk about what California can do to you if you let it in, you know, or well, Jim Morrison, I still think probably said it best. LA Woman's a good song for all of that.
Yeah.
LA's a weird place, man. It's a weird, weird place. And I think like a lot of artists that are from LA or from the LA area have kind of a mixed love-hate relationship with it, you know. But getting out of Cali after a lifetime there, when I went to Utah, man, it was a breath of beyond fresh air, man. It was like poetry, and it felt like I could breathe. And but even after three and a half years, just watching, listening to adults, just general conversation out and about, things like that. And then you start seeing it with the kids. And when I started seeing it with the kids is when it really started hitting me, like how bad things have gotten.
Mm.
My kids, students, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13-year-old kids coming in, and Hillary's a bitch, you know, stuff,
Yeah.
like, holy shit. I mean, stuff like that is like, yeah, just throws you off, you know,
Yeah.
stuff like that, you know. But yeah, I got too much, and I came over here. And now, of course, you know, there's a war 10 hours from here. It's a 10-hour drive to Ukraine from where we are. And
Oh, geez.
madness in Israel. And yeah, world's a wackadoodle place. There's an old word, man, from childhood.
Wackadoodle. Yeah. You know? Yeah, exactly. Yeah. I use that word quite often, especially now in this day and age. I wanted to kind of circle back a little bit on something you mentioned. You were talking about faith and the fact that you know, Saviour Machine was basically, and I think you guys were on a Christian label originally.
We were. Yeah, we tried for 2.5 years to get a secular deal. We had some meetings with Geffen and Sire and Elektra and a couple of smaller labels as well, some indies. But it was a Christian label in the end that basically let us be us. Yeah, because that was the irony was that the secular labels were like, yeah, we like this, and you guys, wow, you got a cool thing here. We like your sound, we like your look, and man, your voice is really interesting, but it's too religious, man. You use too many. There's too much. People don't like that sort of thing. It's too
strange. I
mean, like, what about Black Sabbath, and what about, you know? It's
yeah. I always thought it was odd that you were, you know, for lack of a better term, you guys were kind of pigeonholed into this, you know, Christian rock genre. I found it really strange. I mean, because yeah, you had, you know, I guess spiritual music or music that had, you know, spiritual themes, or, you know, but there's plenty of bands like you mentioned. I mean, yeah, Black Sabbath does that. I mean, they're, you know, you look at all sorts of bands that, you know,
because in the end, maybe it was because we signed with a Christian label and our first album came out on a Christian label.
Yeah.
Maybe that was it in the end. Yeah, I suppose if our stuff would have been never released on any Christian label, maybe it would have been a little more up to people to decide, you know. I don't know. But then again, the word Savior's right in the name of the band, you know. We were pretty bold about things, and you know, I mean, brother, in 1989 when we were doing the first Saviour Machine shows. By the way, here's the.
Oh yeah, what are you drinking?
Paulana.
Oh, great brewery. Yeah, great stuff.
And yeah, so here, my lovely Bavarian wife will pour this perfectly for me. Nice. With the perfect bed and everything. Would you like to say hi?
Yes.
I had an interesting thought about Saviour Machine, and I lost it. It'll come back. I'm watching Her Majesty. Wow, that's impressive.
Perfect pour.
Even with the little yeast wiggle at the bottom. Right on. Thank you, baby.
Hi.
Hi. Cheers. Nice to meet you. Prost, right?
Prost.
Cheers, my friend. Prost.
I'm also drinking a German beer. Well, it's German style. It's not made in Germany. It's made here, but it's a rock beer.
Oh man.
A Rauch beer.
Tastes like there's oranges in it. It's delicious.
I know. This beer is very good.
Delightful.
Nice.
What was I talking about? Your last, you were trying to guide something back somewhere, and I derailed it with a beer again.
Well, I was curious about the. I mean, it just I don't even know if I have a question so much as just I found it interesting that you guys were put into that. That Christian rock bucket. Where I never considered you a Christian band, really. I mean, I just liked the music. I thought it was cool. It's it's similar, kind of not same music, but it was kind of the early years like King's X, kind of the same thing where they were I'd be like, oh, it's a
Right.
Christian band. I'm like, is it? Like,
Yeah, right. Or could it just be a Christian artist who happens to be making music, or a
yeah.
guy that is, or in, how about something like Leonard Cohen, for instance? I mean,
Yeah.
there's a good example of a Jewish man that wrote more songs about Jesus than most Christian artists. You know,
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
it's
Well,
like,
it's,
why
and I don't think people, oh,
we hated that too, brother. And
yeah.
we we had we had almost 3 years of that, man. Between, that's what I was going to. In 1989, when Saviour Machine first started playing under the name Saviour Machine and playing clubs, Inland Empire, where we're from, San Bernardino, Riverside, that part of Southern California. Um, when we started playing clubs and things like that, man, we were pretty theatrical even in the beginning, because it's LA scene, extended LA music scene, and back in a time when everybody had to have a tight image, and you had to have the right band name in the photos, and man, it was back in the late 80s. We're still coming out of all that. You got to have a manager and an agent, and you need a better photo shoot, and all this stuff, and you got to go out and play LA, and you got to go do showcases and pay to play and all this stuff. And so we did a lot of gigging, and we got kicked out of a lot of clubs, man. That's
Really?
basically, like, yeah, man. Well, and it was usually for me either lighting something on fire and breaking a fire code, or getting too much fake blood on certain parts of the stage that I shouldn't have got blood on. And I got better about covering things and stuff like that. But I used so much fake blood back in the early days of Saviour Machine. I would use nearly half a gallon of fake blood at the end of our show, and I come out in we played this thing called the Revelation. It was the last 20 minutes of our demo, basically, which was this kind of 5-part, call it a pre-legend demo. It was the idea of legend in a 20-minute demo in 1990, basically.
Okay.
Let's write a big piece of music about the end of the world, and or the themes throughout the Vocal Revelation and so forth. And so this beer is immediately making me burp here. Hold on a second. Let's see. So we would, at the end of the show, this song this 20-minute piece had like a nice 3-minute guitar intro thing, and then the bass and the drums, nice moody gothy kind of build up thing. And ironically, a chord progression. This piece, the Revelation, the main chord progression in that first piece ended up mutating and becoming one of the key movements of the stand on Saviour Machine 2. So
Oh,
we
wow.
did that to a lot of our early material. We kind of Frankenstein certain parts of it, and you get emotionally attached to certain things. Like, man, it sucks to throw away a whole song. That one part's just really cool. Maybe we could use that in another piece. And so we were ending all of our shows in 89, 90, leading up to our demo recording, our first real attempt to try to get a record deal. When we were doing LA and the Inland Empire club scenes, we would end every show with a 20-minute piece. And sometimes, you only have a 40-minute set or a 30-minute set. So sometimes it was basically we do two songs, and then I'd disappear for a second, come out with this white gown on. This white, basically, was a white sheet that my mom had helped me fashion into, yeah, like a thespian gown. But it come out of this white sheet looking very choral or very religious instantly when in a white robe.
Yeah.
And then I would take a white blindfold, and I'd put a white blindfold over my head, and I'd sing the first 5 or 6 minutes of the song with this blindfold on. And then during the break of the tune, before I chant "Drink the Blood of the Lamb" for a minute or so, I would take this chalice and I'd lift it up and do basically a baptism on stage with half a gallon of this stuff.
Wow.
And I mean, I can't even begin to tell you how alarming this looks when you're standing this close to it. And yeah, it was shocking. It was provocative. It angered a lot of people. There were, for every person that whose mouth opened and they went, "Whoa," mind blown, there was another person who's like, "Fuck you, what the fuck are you doing in a
Yeah.
club? Who the fuck are you to," this whole thing. And so, yeah, there was a lot of resistance, man. We definitely, wherever we went, wherever we played, crowds were divisive. we were putting a weird, heavy. People were coming to drink, and they were in clubs and coming to party and listen to Guns N' Roses, you know.
Yes.
And we're there putting on this rock opera in a small club, and
Right.
it was weird, man. So when a Christian label finally, you know, after being turned down by a handful of secular labels, mainstream labels, or not mainstream, but rock labels and records that were, yeah, the only bites that we were really getting were from really indie labels that couldn't even really afford to put us in the studio. You know, it was like, okay, we're gonna end up making this record for like $4,000, and this is back in 1992. You know,
Right.
it wouldn't have been much. It was like we had like Cleopatra and Triple X, stuff like that. Some of those labels were kind of interested, but the ones that we were going for were like, yeah, we hired a music attorney, went after like Geffen and Elektra and Sire, and yeah, I mean, we were we were trying to be the next Jane's Addiction. We thought, all
Yeah.
right, Jane's came out of LA. They were weird. They were totally weird. Like they came out of nowhere. Maybe it could happen with Saviour Machine. We're weird, you know.
Yeah. Right.
But, yeah. Um, on the heels of Jane's and Guns N' Roses and what was happening in LA, we were kind of right in there between that and the grunge thing that was going on up north in
Yeah.
Seattle.
It was such a
And
strange time.
yeah, and what's really interesting is during that time they tried to put us with goth bands, and we were too heavy for goth bands. They're like, yeah, you guys are too metal to play with goth bands. And they tried to put us with metal bands. We were like not metal enough or too dark to play with metal bands, and just a weird place to fit. We had problems fitting just about anywhere, and we ended up playing with a lot of really bizarre combinations of bands and stuff like that. And I mean, there were some pretty great ones along. We played with Fates Warning once. We played with Flotsam once.
Oh, cool.
We played with Christian Death a couple of times.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's others. Yeah, if I had some time to really, really think about it, there were a few in there that like kind of made sense. But pairing Saviour Machine with anybody was kind of weird back in those days, and um, I find it kind of fascinating that the term gothic metal, this term, it's a genre now, right? You
Yeah.
know,
Yeah.
it didn't exist in 1990, man. Like I don't remember ever hearing that word in 1990.
No.
And by the time I started kind of hearing that term, might have been, let's say, 97, 98. That makes sense, right around there. Gothic metal, 99. Yeah, 97, 98, right? Gothic
Yeah.
metal,
Yeah.
maybe 96. The only, I mean, the only other band I can think of, there's a few, but that might have been fusing some of the goth and the metal thing together in an interesting, maybe Typo, you
Yeah.
know?
I was gonna say the same thing. Yeah. Typo
That's
negative
right
was
around the
huge.
same time we were doing our thing. That makes
Yeah.
sense, you know?
Yeah. And you
Um,
you guys don't sound like Typo necessarily,
no,
but yeah,
no,
similar in terms of yeah, kind of this
putting a
darker, heavier,
yeah, a little
slow.
pepper and a little goth, a little metal, a little, a
Yeah.
little doom.
Yeah.
There was no term called doom metal back in those days either,
Yeah.
you know? I mean, let's be honest, the Black Sabbath is still goes back to them for all of it. Listen to the first Sabbath record. There's your first doom record, you
Yeah.
know, right? Um, but yeah, I think the later Saviour Machine stuff, the Legend stuff, I think is far more doomy. Uh, and I would say the Tomb Doom metal works a lot better for some of the Legend stuff, you know,
Yeah.
slower and definitely more repetitive, and yeah, and it's all kind of, well, thematically it's about as doomy as it gets.
Yeah, that's true. That's very true. Um, let's switch gears a little bit. I was curious about let's go in the Wayback Machine, Mr. Peabody. We'll go in the dating myself there with the cartoons I watched as a kid. But I was curious about, so did you and your brother Jeff, did you come from a musical family? How did that, what was the impetus for the two of you getting into music?
Good question. um I guess we did kind of come from a musical family, in that my both my mother and my father have beautiful singing voices. My mom always sang in the church choir when I was a kid. I always remember her singing in the church choir, and I learned a lot of hymns just from listening to my mom sing in church choir. Probably had a big influence on certain aspects of the way I sing, I imagine, just that Southern gospel thing coming out. But my dad has a beautiful voice. My dad sounds like Roy Orbison.
Oh, wow.
It's just beautiful. Um, and especially particular quality when he sings that old 50 stuff. It's good. And so that's definitely between the 50s influence from my dad and yeah, the not choral music, but gospel music growing up, and yeah, and then discovering things like Kiss when I was 10 years old, I suppose, Yeah, I don't know. It's interesting. My mom listened to a lot of Barbara Streisand and Neil Diamond and Barry Manilow and stuff like that, contemporary Jewish artists.
Right.
But my mom also she had Hotel California, man. That was even pre-Kiss for me, man.
Hmm.
Come to think of it, I think I have memories of me sitting in the living room with the gatefold of Hotel California and just like studying the inside of that thing and looking for all those like, whoa, this is weird, you know, and being fascinated with that particular track. So yeah, maybe California might have been one of the first rock songs I ever really heard outside of, as far as listening to music at home, things like
Hmm.
that. Like I said, my mom would put on you know, Babs, man, a lot of Barbara Streisand, and
Interesting.
so yeah, I guess to answer your question, I guess I did grow up in around music for sure.
Okay.
My brother started taking some guitar lessons for a few weeks when he was like 15 years old, and basically just told his guitar teacher he wanted to learn how to play most Sabbath stuff, and yeah, and he basically learned how to play 5 or 6 Sabbath tunes and was like, all right, I'm cool. I don't need any more lessons. I'm just going to play Sabbath stuff. And that was kind of like my brother's extent of guitar instruction, and it really was just a few months of learning some basics, really, and really a lot of power chords.
Hmm.
Um,
Do you
Jeff had
remember a point
really,
where you two decided like, let's
yeah.
be a band?
Well,
Like,
that's kind of what I was just getting to. Is
oh, sorry.
Jeff had stopped kind of, he wasn't really playing. He had taken some lessons and kind of learned some things, and I knew he could play. But yeah, it was when I was 19. I'd gone through, it's a long story, but which is out there in other forms if people want to read about it for sure. But long story short, I had some crazy teenage years, man. Basically lived about 10 years in a 4-year period in my teens and just did some crazy shit. Man, it was the 80s. It was LA. There was a lot of cocaine everywhere, you know? So yeah, the 80s were crazy, man. And by the time I was 19, man, I'd already like was in recovery from methamphetamine, cocaine, and
Oh,
a
wow.
couple stints of alcohol. And yeah, just bad shit that you shouldn't be doing to yourself in your teen years of all things, man. Just
Right.
wrecking myself in my teen years. So long story short, I came out of this crazy drug madness in my teen years and pulled my shit together and kind of refocused my faith and without it sounding cosmic, man, I I was literally, I felt like I'd been saved, man, saved again, like born again again. It was like, and I had a pretty fundamental upbringing. I was baptized when I was 8 years old, man, altar call, the whole shot. Walked up and accepted Jesus and the whole deal, baptized and yeah. But this is different, man. I'm at 19 years old, coming out of 4.5 years of wackadoodle. Um, yeah, man, I felt like I'd literally been pulled out of the fire again, or like from the clutches of hell kind of thing. And basically, the only way I could say it is whatever life I had before that, whatever thoughts of becoming a professional baseball player or becoming a professional baseball coach or that was the field I thought I was going to get into,
Hmm.
and baseball was my thing all through basically childhood, and it was my kind of main passion. It wasn't music. I mean, I love music, but this baseball was my thing. And those 4.5 years of crazy drugs, basically cocaine, ruined my baseball career, among other things. And yeah, man, by the time I came out of all that stuff, it's like, well, shit, man, I guess I'm not going to be in this career driven kid, this guy, single-minded focus. Like, I'm going to be a pro ball player, and if I'm not a pro ball player, I'm going to die trying, or at least end up a coach somewhere or something. My passions were completely redirected. It's the
Hmm.
only way I can say it. And I'll still, just to this day, I'll say it's an act of God, man. It's some sort of act of God that quite literally changed my entire direction in my life. And basically, from the time I came out all that stuff with a clear head and a wounded spirit, but a spirit that was finding its way back on the tracks, I just poured it all into this Saviour Machine thing. And even before we knew what to call it, it was exactly that. It was me going to my brother Jeff one day, just like, hey man, you got that guitar that you used to play a couple years ago? And he broke it out, and it's old strings on there. I mean, they were dead as hell, and yeah, I mean, it started off with that, like, yeah, man, just me telling my bro, like, I got these, I don't know, songs, man. I'm not sure if they're songs. I got words, and I got shit I want to say, you know. And that's really what it came down to. It was like I felt like I probably should have died somewhere in that 4.5 year period where I was doing all that crazy stuff. You know, cocaine and methamphetamine are, especially the meth that I was getting in the 80s out of Southern California. Talk about bathtub crap, man. I mean, we're
Yes.
talking crank and all kinds of nasty shit that was just God knows what was in it, you know.
Yeah.
Um, Stuff that'll keep you up for 5 or 6 days, and then you know go into like some sort of like, yeah, you get all kinds of horrible stuff. Just the 80s were bad in Southern California, and Inland Empire, where I grew up, that San Bernardino area was flooded with it between Hesperia, Victorville, biker meth, man, lots of it, you know. And
Wow.
it's kind of, it was the 80s Southern California, that San Bernardino area there, San Bernardino County, where we're from, our backyard, basically, Saviour Machine's hood. Man, it was the meth capital of the world for a while. I don't know if it still is, but
Wow.
yeah, man, it was like the foundation for what you see happening in America, yeah, today. Basically, it's like, but they were ahead of their time, man. San Bernardino. I think they were a murder capital of the country for a couple of years running there as well. You know, yeah, um, yeah. Methamphetamine is a bad drug. Um, so that was a long way of saying, when I came out of all that shit, man, and all of that crap in the '80s and that scene, I felt like, man, I really felt lucky to be alive, and I felt like I had something to share with people, like a testimony, for lack of a better word. I felt like, man, I got something to say, and I don't know how to say it other than to put it into words and maybe sing it somehow, you know?
Cool.
And all of a sudden I had, instead of being single-minded focused on baseball and that sort of career, I was single-mindedly focused on art and music and testimony through all of that. Somehow finding a way to, you too would have been a little piece in that puzzle there. They were, at the time, late 80s, the world's biggest Christian band, as far as I was concerned, as far as many diehard U2 fans were concerned. You know,
Right.
you think about U2, and people never called them a Christian band, but let's be obvious and let's be honest. You go through those first 4 or 5 albums, you know, it's right there.
Yeah.
You know, their faith as believers is very open in their material. And yeah, U2 was a bit of a prototype. It was like
Hmm.
Jeff and Dean and I kind of felt like, well, if our Bowie Sabbath thing, if we could take that kind of that passion and kind of power of U2. I mean, the simple songs, but like, man, they're a good live band, especially back in those days. Those guys could lift a room. There was
Yeah.
something about a U2 performance back in the late 80s, early 90s where they just like, they were on fire. You could feel almost a sense of like like a spiritual energy in their concerts. Literally like a Peter Gabriel show or something like that. Where you're like, man, this is
Yeah.
more than music. There's something here, you know? And yeah, that was part of it too. Is like, let's see if we could combine that in this. And I don't know what we were talking about, brother, but it was hard being it was really hard being a band of faith and a band with a faith-based message in any of those scenes, whether it was the goth scene or the metal scene, or whether it was the Christian rock scene, which is weird enough. But thankfully, we got to put some stuff on tape and got to record those things and document a little slice of history, you know.
Yeah.
And yeah, it's mind blowing to look back on all of it now and try to keep it in perspective. But as you said earlier, it may be a case where we were just a little bit, we were so weirdly unique that we were a little bit ahead of our time, and so we'll probably always, Saviour Machine will probably always be one of those kind of semi-obscure things that, like, yeah, people discover in random ways over the years and stuff like that, but it missed its it obviously missed its chance to do something global and something, you know, truly impactful culture wise. I think its real shot would have been in the late 90s, you know, when it could have happened.
Yeah.
But my personal life got turned black, completely wackadoodle in 1999, and that's a whole other thing. But yeah, the late 90s were filled with some, when I was doing all those crazy legend shows and all that really, really heavy theatrical stuff, when Saviour Machine kind of hit its most theatrical, is also around the time, the middle of the Legend project is when my life got turned upside down with some crazy shit with the U.S. government and stuff like that. You know?
Oh wow.
Yeah, I don't know if you ever read about that. I wrote a book about it, published a book about it like 12 years ago, like a collection of like personal journals, memoirs, and things like that. But long story short, man, like Y2K, end of 1999, my wife and I, my ex-wife and I were profiled by FBI as
Wild.
potential Saviour Machine, basically. And you got to remember, Saviour Machine had a website early, like late 90s. We had a pretty big website with a pretty active message board. And there was a lot of crazy discussions on that message board. I mean, a lot of end of the world stuff, of course. You know, you get what you put out, man.
Yeah.
Who was doing this crazy stuff, and our website had pictures of me burning UN flags and, you know, all this imagery and stuff like that on the website. And we'd been building, I mean, for a decade basically, had been building this following of Saviour Machine, you know, Saviour Machine fans that, you know, some were just into the music, but some were really, really, really deep into it and into the lyrics and into the message and into the prophecy and and into Legend as a thing and all of that. And then Legend became Frankenstein's monster, man. But back in that time, the end of the 90s, 98 and 99 in particular, we had a lot of traffic on that website. Those message boards were filled with a lot of really bizarre, what would be considered today average conversations that go on, conspiracy theories on every website, you know. I mean,
Right. Yeah.
but back in 97, 98, it wasn't such a thing, you know, where you didn't have people on, did you know that the Rothschild Federation, you know, and do you know that this conspiracy behind that the pharmaceutical industry, we had shit like that back in the late 90s. And people were being drawn to the Saviour Machine site, even if they didn't like the music, just for some of the discussions on the pages and things like that. And it was, it was pretty, it's free speech, man. And there was a lot of discussions that I couldn't keep up with. Like things got to the point where it started to alienate me. I used to be I was very active on the boards for many years, and then got to the point where people just started asking questions I couldn't answer. the responsibility of the whole thing, you know, it's a strange thing that happened during all that as I was going through some sort of, yeah, character identity crisis in this, some, you know, it's hard to articulate, but you spend a decade basically in a character, you know, and doing all this crazy stuff, writing all this intense music and so forth, and then one day you think you're just, yeah, just an artist. I got my small little thing. Like, I'm happy there's 10,000 people in the world that have, it kind of stuck with me and can kind of, you know, it's a small, very small little modest audience, but they're loyal and they've been around for, yeah, a long time. And that's really enough for me in so many ways. Like, I don't need anything more. This is more than I ever dreamed of. To be sitting here talking to you today, 30 years after my first record, is mind blowing to me, dude. And I mean
Yeah.
that. And it's like, it's beyond humbling to sit here and think, wow, like, just, I mean, we knew we were doing something cool, something interesting, something different, but man, like, you never imagine that people are going to give a shit 30 years later. Man, it's mind blowing, you know?
It's crazy to think that, yeah, that first album is, yeah, I mean, this year is the 30-year anniversary. I know it was re-released, remastered, re-released, and you toured with the Nine, doing a lot of songs from that album. And yeah, but I'm the same. It's like, how was that 30 years ago? That's insanity. How can that be 30 years ago?
I derailed my own conversation, and it happens when I get to really heavy stuff. Sometimes it's a reflex to derail myself so it doesn't get much worse. But just so I put a lid on that, the end of
Oh
the
yeah.
90s, the first time I really disappeared, because I kind of disappeared around 2000. I started disappearing right around 99, and my spans of disappearing just got longer and longer and longer. You know, I didn't disappear overnight, but it started in 99 when this FBI thing happened. And long story short, man, it had to do with Y2K, and it had to do with an FBI mandate to down to local law enforcement all throughout the country. Basically, it was like putting everybody on high alert for potential religious cult activity at the end of the century, the turn of the millennium. You
Hmm.
know, remember all that scare? Why? Oh, this is going to happen. This is going
Yeah.
to happen. All that stuff. I know it's crazy in retrospect, but there were generally people like thinking that religious leaders were going to, you know, do mass suicides and shit like that, you know, stuff like that. So somehow the Saviour Machine website got profiled, somehow got flagged. I don't know still the origin of how it happened, but on a Thursday morning in 1990, October of 1999, I had 16 agents in my house for the remainder of the day,
Jeez.
and they took everything, man. They took computers, hard drives, copies of every video cassette, copies of every disc, uh, boxes of fan mail. They took it all, man.
Wow.
And yeah, for the next almost, almost 2 years. It was until August 2001. For the next, what's that, 22 months? Yeah, for the next 22 months, they had my shit, basically, including passports. They froze our bank accounts, everything, man. It was like,
Jeez.
uh-huh.
That is
Um,
insane.
this is not America.
Yeah.
Crazy shit, man. Um,
Wow.
my wife and I went through like 2 years of wading through investigations. First the FBI, and then they kicked it to a state level, and then they went up our asses for taxes, and everything basically worked out in the end. But long story short, there was some problems in the end, legal fees, and my wife had made some mistakes on some disability forms, and they ended up like, state of California ended up suing my wife for some disability fraud and shit like that. And it was a nasty process. 2.5 years later, and about $37,000 later, which was a fucking lot of money at the time, you
Yeah.
know. It still is. But we had two babies. We had a 4-year-old and a 2-year-old at the time, man. So it was just, it was a, it changed the course of Saviour Machine history, is what it did, man. And it just, what I went through personally during that time.
Yeah.
Just having to, this identity crisis coming down, basically, is what happened. You spend 10 years doing something thinking you're an artist, and like, yeah, I know some people take this stuff really seriously, but nobody's ever going to take it so seriously they think I'm going to try to hurt somebody. And then one day you got people in your house saying, we think you're trying to hurt somebody. And it just, man, it rocked my world, man. It shook the very foundation of being an artist, man.
Oh, sure.
And like, it's like, how can I even do this anymore if there's people that could even interpret it this way? You know what I mean? It's like, and so it, for lack of a better term, it really fucked me up, man, for a long time. And it basically made it impossible to finish the Legend project, and among other things. But yeah, man, that is what started that process that led nearly 20 years to 1,000 Scars, man. And a big portion of that record that we talked about at the beginning of this interview, that 1,000 Scars record, is a big chunk of the narrative in the middle of that thing that deals with some of that stuff, you know. The identity crisis that I went through just in it's one thing when you play a character on stage. We know the whole Ziggy Stardust phenomenon, you know, that whole thing. And Alice Cooper, I think, said it best, man. He's like, and if anybody was qualified to say this, it'd be him. But he said, today I can be Alice when I walk out on the stage. The rest of the time I'm Vince, you know? And he said, I thank God that I could make that delineation. He goes, it would be crippling to have to be Marilyn Manson 24 hours a day.
Right.
You know what I mean? And this is said, of course, back 20 years ago, you know, something like that, maybe even 25 years ago. But it was becoming crippling to be Eric Clayton 24 hours a day, even on that kind of small scale, you know? And it was just one of those things where you're young, you get into this, and you know, I'm an artist. I just want to be heard. I want to be an artist. I want people to be moved by what I do and to connect with what I do. And maybe, just maybe, if you create something interesting enough, it'll be remembered somewhere. But you never, at 21, you don't think about like what even a little bit of fame is like, or what a little bit of fame does to you, or what a little bit of responsibility to your audience does to you. And I was just young, man, and I was unprepared I was putting some heavy stuff out there, and I got a lot of heavy stuff back. And then when it got to a level where my government thought it was interesting enough to take a peek, it was just too much, man. And
that's insane. I can't believe that. And how do you continue to work artistically during that, you know? I mean,
it stunted my creativity, to say the least.
Yeah, that would be crippling. Yeah, that would be I mean,
but hey, brother, thankfully, all these years later, man, I can say that I feel more, I don't know, I feel more creatively juiced and connected than I have in a long time, man. Really long time, maybe ever. It's different. Maybe it just comes with age. I just turned 56 a week ago, man. It's something about this age wisdom thing. You just learn kind of where to put your time. You know what I mean? It's maybe just get better about where to put your energy in.
Yeah, what's important, what's not.
People waste their energy. Oh God, everybody's so tired and miserable and pissed off, and we were talking about the rotting soul of America, the rotting soul of just mankind, all of it, you know, humankind. Man, I think a lot of it has to do with the fact that people forgot how to do this, how to just have a conversation about real things, man.
Right, yeah.
Makes me sad.
I would be remiss if I didn't ask you about, I was really curious about, and again, sorry, I'm totally switching gears here, but
I'm not, as you notice, I am non-linear, brother. This is all
and you know, full disclosure, I came into the party late, as far as Saviour Machine. I first heard you on the Human Equation, the Ayreon project with, you know, Arjun Lucas in
2014 or 2015, the record.
Yeah, well, the
2001.
original album,
Yeah,
the
2004.
2004, I think, right?
Yeah, that's
Yeah,
right. Yeah,
that's
that
where I
was like
first,
my one-off. That's right.
yeah,
2004 was the recording. That's right. And then 2015 was the performance. That's right.
yeah. So it was, yeah, it would have been 2004-ish, and somebody illegally burned me a disc, because they knew I was into metal and just said, "Hey, check this out." And I had never heard, I remember Vengeance, but I didn't know what Arjun was doing, and I'd
Yeah.
never heard Ayreon, and I put it on, and the person knew I was big into like progressive metal, and and I knew the name, and I had heard some music of Saviour Machine, but it was really that album, was just hearing you sing on that album. I'm like, who is this guy? This voice is incredible. I need to know more. And that's when I went down that rabbit hole and started really delving into more into your music. But I was curious about how that all came about. How did you get involved with the project?
I can't remember if it was an email or a phone call, but I got a Yvette, his manager at the time. Remember, can't remember how to pronounce her last name, but his manager at the time reached out to me, and I can't remember if it was a phone call or email, but it was at a time where I was already, by 2004, I was already kind of laying pretty low. I'd been, I think the last time I hadn't performed in 2 years live in Deutschland 2002, and performances were getting pretty rare at that point. We hadn't, Saviour Machine hadn't toured. It was just like one date in 2020, 2001, one in 2002, nothing in 2003. So, and it was very shortly before the last Saviour Machine performance in makeup,
Hmm.
which would have been November. Yeah, man, I get on these dates, but November 2004, Mexico City would have been the last time Saviour Machine played with the whole, all of it, with the
Okay.
whole stage thing. And yeah, the Ayreon thing that I flew over here. He flew me over, paid me well for it. It was at the time I'd never made so much money for doing something so simple. It was really nice to be. Yeah, it was like kind of, yeah, it was really my first paid gig, I think. Like
Hmm.
outside of something. Never got paid for stuff I was working on myself.
Right.
But not really. Um, but yeah, it was the first time I was like hired as a singer to come and sing on somebody's record, and it wasn't a friend or something like that, or some other artist that I co-produced something for or something like that. And yeah, it was. I'd never heard of him, brother. I had never heard of him. Um, but I had. That's not to say that I should have even. I just was very far estranged from what had become the prog rock or prog metal scene at that point. I most of the Saviour Machine audience, we had our prog fans over the years, and a little bit of this prog audience and that sort of thing. But most of our audience were goth and metal kids,
Hmm.
you know. And so yeah, I guess I really, during those years of Saviour Machine in particular, I wasn't listening to a lot of music, and I really wasn't following what was going on. I think like a lot of artists, when they're doing their own thing and they're really wrapped up in their own stuff, they'll be real selective about what they choose to listen to, and because it
Right.
can kind of seep in influential and that sort of thing. And during the Saviour Machine, during the Legend period, when I was working on that stuff, I was listening to either classical or film score pretty much just
Hmm.
exclusively. I'd like kind of almost set these parameters. Like, in order to create Legend, I'm not going to listen to any rock music at all. Like, I'm just going to listen to symphonic music,
Interesting.
soundtrack music, soundscape music, classical music, stuff like that. And yeah, so I boxed myself out. I hadn't even had no idea about him or his legacy of music and all the things, the artists he'd worked with. So when they reached out to me, I was really ignorant, and I was like, "Oh, okay, cool." And then they sent me a bunch of CDs, and I listened to it. I was like, "Wow, stuff's really impressive. It's not really my thing. It's a little too bright for me as far as like my thing."
Yeah.
But then he sent me, and at first I didn't balk on it, but I was like, no, I'm not sure if I could find my place in this. It's a little up for me, a little happy for me. A lot of this is, a little bright for me. And he goes, no, we had a couple of phone calls, and he said, I'm going to send you the pieces of music that I want you to sing on. And he goes, I hear your voice here, and I hear this
Mm.
melody here. And he was right. And he sent me that stuff, and I sang along with it, and yeah, found myself in it pretty easy. Once he said, hey, you're going to play the voice of reason in this thing, and I want you to be that same force that you are in Saviour Machine, where it's a voice of authority. When you speak, listen. Simple as that. Every time your mouth opens, this is something to be listened to. Listen to the words that are coming out of the mouth here,
Yeah.
and yeah, that was all the character direction I needed. Was he was like, I would just want you to do your Saviour Machine thing,
Cool.
and so yeah, I kind of
That's
did,
fun.
and then it was fun though, because there's a few points on that record. I remember one of the tracks, bad with titles, but bad with titles of songs on that record in particular. But it's one of the ones. I think it starts the second act of the live performance. Actually, it's the one
Mm.
where you're driving home. It's 1 p.m. or 1 a.m.
Oh yeah.
Da, 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 you're a broken man. That one. The past is catching up with you. That one. I remember when I was tracking that, I immediately fell into this kind of Bowie-esque thing when I was doing it, and I was like, "Oh, I'm sorry." And he's like, "No, that's," and he's like, "Give me more, go more Bowie on this thing." So yeah, there's a few tracks on that Theater Equation where he just kind of said, kind of vamp it up, do a little Bowie thing here, and that was
Yeah.
fun for me.
Yeah, that it was. Yeah, you did an incredible job. Yeah, personification of reason. I thought it was brilliant, and it's a darker album. As far as he goes, as far as his
I
work
think
goes,
it's his darkest record by far, and
yeah,
I would go as far as to say that I think it's his most mature themed album too. Like
yeah,
just the theme itself, it's put it this way, I'm very proud to have been a part of that record in
yeah,
particular.
very powerful. And you mentioned, of course, you were part of the theater production, the Theater
Right.
Equation CD and
Yeah, that
DVD,
was
which is brilliant
that was
as
that was a
well.
mind-blowing experience for
Yeah,
sure.
very cool.
And instrumental in my career, brother, because inadvertently it brought me out of my longest period of exile.
Yeah, I
You
was gonna
know,
say, I thought that, yeah, it seemed like that's,
it did.
yeah, I was kind of curious if that's what really was kind of the spark to help
It
to
really
help you.
was, man, because performing at those concerts, man. Oh God, I was so nervous. I hadn't been on a stage in years, and I had never been on a stage in a production that wasn't mine. You know,
Mm,
you know what I mean. So it was really weird. On the other hand, it was freeing. I didn't have all the responsibility of like, are the lights right, and is the smoke right, and
mm,
is
yeah.
the mask going to fall and crush my drummer, and you know, you know, um, yeah. I have to make sure I can reach the chains and don't catch anybody on fire. You know, it was much different just being in a production. I called it dance moves, basically. Like Devin Graves and I during the production, during the rehearsals in particular, it was like, okay, got the lyrics and got the vocal melody. We got to the rehearsals and we were like, okay. They were like, you need to hit your mark here, and you need to hit your mark here, and it's choreographed. It's like, and we're like, oh shit, there's dance moves, man. Got to hit these marks, and yeah, it was challenging, and it was definitely nerve wracking for me to be out on a stage again. I hadn't been out on stage in a long time. It had been 5 years basically since, and even that it had just been a few smaller acoustic performances that I did with Saviour Machine, but I hadn't really been out on stage and performed in front of thousands of people
Yeah, and
in
that's a big production too. That was a
yeah, and it
very
was,
big production.
like I said, Mexico City 2004. We played to 9,000 people in Mexico City. The hadn't performed to anything like that until the Ayreon thing. Nothing like that. And it had been 20 years, man. I mean, 2004 to 2015, so 10 years, 11 years. That's, yeah, 11 years is long enough to not be on a stage. And so I had a real touch of stage fright. I really did. It was like, oh. And but got through it, and thankfully, man, because by the last show, by that last performance, I was having fun. I actually like found myself having a good time, and made some friendships that some will last forever, you know.
Nice.
And yeah, I found a brother on that production. Devin Graves and I are friends to the very end.
Nice.
And
Another brilliant artist. Yeah, he's fantastic. When he produced your album, right?
he was my co-producer on this thing, and brilliant, genius engineer, man. That's the thing about, you know, me as a producer. I've been a part of producing every record that I've ever made, but when it comes to the engineering part of it, the science of engineering, man, I hate that stuff. That stuff, it messes with my mojo, messes with my creativity, and I'm just a much better artist and a much better producer if I have someone who's got their hands on the knobs, you know. And Devin can put his hand on my knob anytime. We're that close, brother. Yeah.
Nice.
Yeah.
That's
yeah,
great.
he just, you know, like you were talking about the vocals on A Thousand Scars, brother. The reason those vocals are so good is because he recorded them, man. And I may have, you know, I always push myself for the best performance I can give, but man, he put the right mic on me and had me do this take again. You just this one word right here, man. Just and also on the flip side of that, guided me away from being too critical of myself, which becomes my greatest obstacle when producing a record. I'm really good at producing other musicians, but when I have to produce my own vocals, it's literally like pulling my teeth. And it's just a twisted process of like being your own producer, producing vocals, and just having a brother there, whether it's my brother Jeff or my brother Devin in this case. Those are the only two that I'll probably ever trust to ever record my voice ever again, you know, most likely. But yeah, it's amazing how both of them were hugely instrumental in bringing me back to the microphone. Yeah.
Nice.
The Bowie project with my brother, recording one song a month over the course of a year, was hugely therapeutic, and also far less foreboding as an artist than going, okay, here's a record, I got to put out a record. By the end of the year, it'll be a record. And we did that one Bowie track a month for one a month for a year, and it was the perfect way for my brother and I to get through that production. It was a passion. You know,
yeah, that's an incredible album. That was incredible stuff.
You've heard it then. Okay, awesome.
Yeah, I love it. It's fantastic. And I love the
300
choice
people in the world that has heard it, right?
Oh, it's fantastic. And the choice of tracks too. I compliment you on that, because it's so easy, I think, for people like, oh yeah, well, we'll do all these big hits. And you know, there's some hits on there, but you did you did some really cool songs. Yeah. Like Look Back in Anger is one of my all-time favorite Bowie songs. And so when I saw that was on there, I'm like, yes, thank you. I thought I thought it was a beautiful tribute to his life. And it was really cool. That was great.
That's where this connection with Devin Graves is also, it's interesting. My brother and I, it was Jeff and I that decided we need to do a tribute. It'd be cool if we did like one song from every record from the 70s. This is a cool way to do it. And it's the decade of, like I said, it's the decade of Bowie music that had such a profound influence on me. And so Jeff and I knew what we wanted to do. And if you notice, you were talking about the track listing on that Bowie decade thing. The only commercial really, I guess there's a couple of them on there, but the only really commercial one would have been Fame.
Yeah.
And what's ironic about that, that's the one track that I didn't do with my brother, but I did with my other brother, with Devin.
Oh, okay.
And Devin produced that track. So the Fame track on the Bowie project is, just so for the record, the vocals are me and Devin, and then we put some sound effects and some sound bites from old Bowie interviews layered in there and stuff like that, little things you can hear in headphones and stuff. But particularly from a classic Bowie interview with Dick Cavett in 1975, in particular, which is the year Fame came out, and I'm into numbers and things like that. So, this track Fame, next time you listen to it and you're listening to the music, know that Devin Graves played every single instrument you hear on there. It's
Oh, cool.
drums, bass, guitar, every single thing you hear. That's Devin. That's Devin being Prince, basically.
Wow.
Like that's Devin being Prince. And Devin actually, instead of doing it to a metronome, this is crazy, but he wanted to do the track such justice to the original piece of music that he actually recorded the drums to the original drum track and like literally
Wow.
like yeah, and pan things into places like in the mix, pan things into the same areas and stuff like that. Really,
Oh,
it's a beautiful tribute and it sounds amazing.
yeah.
It's definitely one of the highlight productions of the because you know Devin, everything he touches sounds so good. He's just got a real gift for making things sound sparkly, you know.
Yeah. Yeah. He's got an amazing ear.
Yeah, he does.
Yeah. Oh, that's so
Love
cool.
it.
I didn't know that. Yeah, that's great. I didn't know that I didn't know that he had done that. That's great. Yeah,
Yeah.
beautiful album.
That-
Really,
that-
really
That's
cool.
where it started when we did Fame together. He and I had such a kind of connection when and because we only got to know each other during rehearsals on the Theater Equation thing, 2015. Kept a long distance friendship, and then I moved over here. And in 2017, we did Fame together, the Fame track. I spent a week with him doing the Fame track, and then I think that's probably when I told him, yeah, face to face when we finished Fame. I think that's probably when I said, brother, if I ever get around to making this solo record that I've been dicking with for the last, however many years, at least in here. I hadn't written any of the songs yet. By
Hmm.
2017, I hadn't written any of A Thousand Scars, but let's say I had plenty of the groundwork was laid,
Okay.
plenty of themes brewing around and ideas and maybe melodies and things like that, phrases. But I knew there was a record coming at some point. I just didn't know if it would ever happen. And I told Devin in 2017 when we finished Fame that if I ever actually got this thing ready to go, that he would be the one to record it. He'd be the one to help me realize it. And man, I'm really, really proud of it, and I'm really proud of the work we did together on this thing, and I miss him right now actually. And I think he and I are gonna find an excuse to do something together this next year. Something,
Oh, good.
even if it's just one song or something like that.
Cool. Cool.
Probably more of an excuse to hang out,
Yeah. Nice. Yeah, I was curious. Do you have plans for a follow-up solo album at this point?
You know what? I really don't. Not as
Hmm.
I think at the moment. I might do an Eric Clayton and the Nine record at some point. We might
Oh,
do a
cool.
Eric Clayton and the Nine album. Yeah, I mean the same band I recorded A Thousand Scars with. Maybe I might do a band record with them. Maybe Eric Clayton and the Nine. Just who knows? Or we could record a song or something as Eric Clayton and the Nine. I'm not sure, but at the moment, between you and me, most of my focus is kind of retro Saviour Machine stuff at the moment, and
Hmm.
uh, I may get back to another solo record. I have been writing music. That's what's weird is I
Oh,
probably
cool.
got I probably got 30 songs that could be developed into songs at this point, like 30 pieces of music that could turn into something, and maybe
Cool.
15 of those really. But I haven't been writing with, let's say, intent or purpose, or you know what I mean, like, okay, here's a story, I'm going to sit down and write a record. It's been more of like a very passive process the last couple of years of one day I'll just, oh shit, I got a melody, and I'll sit down
Hmm.
at the piano, or oh, that's an interesting groove, I like that groove, and I'll sit down and find a funky bass sound on my you know little keyboard here and like work out a little bass line, or you know beatbox a drum groove into a lot of, I mean, brother, I've recorded and written and recorded most of my albums just on either old school, like, hand recorders, like, remember the old micro cassette recorders?
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, I wrote 3 or 4 records on those things, man.
Wow.
Like,
Oh, that's
those
cool.
would be cool if I could ever find those little micro cassettes, man. Those would be
Yeah.
cool. Talk about demos. But yeah, I wrote most of those most of those Saviour Machine records on those things. And A Thousand Scars, man, that record was literally written on my cell phone, man. I just on my voice recorder on the cell phone,
Oh, wow.
I'd sit and I'd write the music and lyrics, and when I'd have enough to demo something, I would just sit and hit record and demo on my phone, you know.
Nice.
And yeah, for me, it's still it's still the most organic way to work somehow, is just at a piano, you know. Um, and even though a lot of ideas come rhythmically or from a bass part or a guitar part, or not all songs start with a vocal line for me.
Mm.
Sometimes they do, but a lot of times they just start with a simple something out of the blue, and then it turns into something. But I haven't been writing, like I said, I don't have a concept in mind. I'm not trying to tell a story in particular right now with music. But I think I am trying to tell a story with a documentary right now, brother.
Yeah,
I
I'm
think
excited
this
for that.
I think this documentary that I'm working on, I think if I do it right and if I don't screw it up, I think it'll not only be interesting for Saviour Machine fans, and for people that are kind of interested in the history around the band, but if I do it right, maybe it'll be interesting on a slightly broader level, to people that are maybe just interested in an interesting story about art and culture and religion and the 90s, and
Yeah.
just kind of a crazy little explosion that kind of came out of nowhere, and maybe some perspective, and maybe there's some lessons to be learned. I mean, that's the point of art, right? It's like, and hold up a mirror, and if I can document this story and tell it in a way that is honest, I think there's a narrative in it that's not just retrospective, but also uh, relevant for, and yes, timeless. Some sort of, you know what I mean?
Yeah. Yeah.
Like, there's no point in making a documentary just to document something and say, here's a little piece of history. I feel like in this story itself, like I said, this documentary started off as a making of. Okay, 30 years, we made our first record 30 years ago. I got a bunch of footage of us making the record, including like raw footage of me recording vocals and guitars and drums and all this stuff,
Cool.
For this first Saviour Machine album 30 years ago. We're babies, and the
Yeah.
footage is just mind blowing. Looking at us, going, yeah, it's crazy seeing yourself at 25 years old,
Yeah.
you know.
Right.
Um, and it's mind blowing. Even hearing my voice when I talk, it's like, oh my god, I sound like a baby. My
Yeah.
voice sounds, it's just weird and stuff like that. And um, it's a profound experience. But the most profound part of it, the most, I don't know, the most intriguing part of this as an artist and as an aspiring filmmaker, a frustrated filmmaker, because let's be honest, one of the reasons why Save Machine probably looks and sounds the way it did was because I probably always wanted to be a filmmaker. That's
Hmm.
I ended up in music somehow, but I think at the heart of it, I'm probably more of a movie junkie than I am anything. And you and I could do a whole separate interview just talking about movies, I'm sure.
Oh
You
yeah.
know? But yeah, man, my brother and I, Jeff and I, we both to this day uh, are big cinema buffs. And even in the dying world of cinema now, cinema's been dying for a long time, and true movies are definitely becoming a rare thing. But I think that's one of the reasons why Saving Machine ended up looking and sounding the way it does, is because I think we were cinematic artists. Artists that wanted to do something cinematic, and so from this aspiring documentary filmmaker, um, who's, yeah, I mean, I kind of look at this chapter of my artistic career.
Nice.
Uh, you asked me about a solo record. I may have another solo record in me, but right now, I feel like my artistic calling is to document a little moment in history 30 years ago, and hopefully tell a story that's relevant and compelling for today's youth and other folks that may not have ever even heard about something like this.
Yeah. Yeah. That's exciting. Do you and I don't know if like format wise, are you looking to do a film or like a docu series
It's
or
going
kind
to
of
be a docu-series.
series? Okay.
Originally, I was just going to do a 90-minute thing at the beginning, and then I realized, man, I got like over 30 hours of footage. And so, like I said, it started off as let's document the making of the record. And then the more I got into the footage later in the year, and especially some live footage, and we went on this crazy little tour. We went on an ill-fated tour with a Christian band, a Christian metal band called Deliverance, who was pretty popular at the time. They were in 1993. They'd had some MTV Headbangers Ball rotation, stuff like that. And they were a big draw Christian metal act at the time. And yeah, we went on a tour. Saviour Machine went on tour with Deliverance for a tour of Christian America, basically Christian sponsored tour dates, and it was interesting to say the least. And ended up coming crashing down in Minnesota with, we got the plug pulled on us in this club, and yeah, they shut the power down in the middle of our gig, and yeah,
Jeez.
called the cops. It turned, yeah, basically, long story short, in '93 starts off with Saviour Machine signing a record deal, and by the end of the year, we made a record, scared the shit out of the Christian music industry and pissed off most of the people that had any power. And at the end of the year, the whole Christian industry was like, go the fuck away. Don't ever come back.
Right.
And that's really what it was like. And and so, yeah, I realized through the course of going through all this footage that, man, there's a much more interesting story than just how we made this record. The story is in what happened after the record came out. It was wacky. And yeah, so that's, hopefully we'll find a way to make a compelling documentary. My brother is Jeff has been doing a lot of soundtrack music for some small indie documentaries and some indie films and stuff like that. My brother's really got a gift for score and just creating atmosphere, and so yeah, we've got the soundtrack of Saviour Machine 1, of course. We're working on a number of interviews, people that were deeply connected to the project back then, and retrospective things, and of course a whole bunch of footage that no one's ever seen. Really, a lot of stuff that's just super, I don't know if it's interesting, but it's rare. You know,
I can't
hoping
wait.
it's interesting.
I can't wait. This sounds fantastic. I'm very excited to see this. This will be great.
You can do a lot in iMovie, man.
Yeah.
And so I'm just working with a simple editing program, and I think if I do this right, it'll be a little 3-part documentary, 3 probably 90-minute episodes, and kind of break the year down like that. The signing, the production of the album, the release of the album, and the immediate aftermath, and then the kind of fallout towards the end of the year, which is really when things got crazy. And by the end of '93, to find Saviour Machine 1, the first album, in a Christian record store by the end of the year was pretty hard to do. There was like maybe 50 or 60 stores in the States. It went from selling over 10,000 units in its first 3 months to not even being available except for like in 50 stores that you could maybe find a copy of it. And
Yeah, you guys. Stores, you know? Yeah, you guys definitely got blacklisted. That's for sure.
Weird. It's just weird that could happen even back then. You know,
yeah.
I mean, now I'm sure, you know, but weird. We weren't prepared for it. And Jeff and Dean and I, we were young and we were unprepared for what happened. And so it's interesting as men in our 50s now, looking back on it now, we spent a lot of time in the last year. Just Jeff and Dean and I have reconnected a lot the last year through probably I think the mutual we live in 3 different areas of the world. Dean's in Washington, my brother's still in California, and I'm here in Germany. But Dean and Jeff and I have spent more time together physically and through other forms in the last 2 years than we had in the last 20 years combined. Easy.
Oh, wow.
And
That's good.
That in itself, yeah, it's almost like the anniversary of this 30-year kind of thing. It's like it all pulled us kind of back into this thing. Maybe it all just kind of hit us at once that, like, holy shit, it's been 30 years since we did that, you know? But it's been cool and it's been powerful. And by the way, if you haven't, I don't plug shit, but I did on my YouTube channel, which is just my personal channel. I don't even advertise it, but I did a podcast, me and my brother and Dean, the 3 original members of Saviour Machine. We did a cool little, like this Zoom thing with a friend moderating for us, mutual friend, and just talked about some of the things. It was kind of a a little preview. I would say a little preview of the documentary to come in
Yeah,
somewhere.
yeah, I watched
Just
that.
to
It
see.
was great.
Oh, did you?
Yeah, it was
Okay, well,
fantastic. Yeah, I love the that you had the footage in the
I'm trying to sell
background,
you
and
on this thing, and you watched it right
no,
on.
it was great. But yeah, and I'll definitely, I think those watching this should definitely check that out. It's
Wonderful.
fascinating. It's really cool. Yeah,
Thank you, bro.
yeah,
That's really the best way I could I think that's the best way I could advertise like what I'm hoping the documentary feels like. At least it's gonna cover some heavy things, of course, and the reason we needed to do that podcast, I think, is we needed to take a lighter take to the whole thing before we get into some of the heavy stuff, you know. And
yeah,
so it was good for Dean and Jeff and I to kind of take a lighter conversational approach to it before we get into, making a documentary that has, like, yeah, that deals with some of the heavier stuff involved and things like that. So, but
cool.
I'm so glad you watched that, brother. Thank you.
Yeah, it was very good. It was really interesting. Yeah, and I love the footage that you did show on that was incredible. It was amazing to
Yeah,
see,
those are all,
tracking the drums, and yeah.
a lot of that footage is really damaged, unfortunately, and
Oh, it's too bad.
so I'm working on digital restoration of some of that stuff right now. It's costly and time consuming, but it's working. And a lot of that footage that was really wobbly and damaged from heat or videotape, man, it's crap. They were recorded on these micro video cassettes, these small video, handycam,
Yeah,
and yeah, and I don't think these tapes were always kept in the perfect environment as far as a cool, dry place kind of thing. So some of the damage on these things is definitely real. It's time and weather and all that stuff, but and some of it just has to do with the fact that we didn't think that any of this stuff would ever really be seen. So it's interesting. It's an interesting style of documentary filmmaking to try to produce something out of this footage that is so raw, but it's real, man. It's real, and it feels the way it should feel, and it's I don't know, all the more, I don't know, it's with all the AI and everything, and I don't know about you, but I have difficulty watching a lot of things anymore because I don't sit watching or listening, experiencing. I don't sense much organic quality in things anymore,
yeah,
and things are becoming so unorganic that I don't know. I just want to be a part of. I almost feel like I'm on some sort of pilgrimage, man. Save organic art.
yeah,
It's like I just want to be a part of making something real, man. Whether it's music, whether it's a documentary, whether I score a soundtrack or produce a Broadway play. Who knows? I don't know.
there
You
you
know?
go, there you go. Yeah, I'm right there with you. I totally agree. I totally agree. Yeah, the whole AI, CGI, all of that, it's a little out of control, and it's frustrating when there's a I love photography and painting, and as well as music, and there's a page I follow. I can't remember the name of the page, but it's just a lot of amateur artists and professional artists can load their stuff there, and they can sell it. And again, I forget the name of the web page, but I've noticed in the last 6 months there's been a huge influx of AI work that's cropping up, and it's getting more and more annoying. And and then there's some stuff that looks good, it's cool looking, but then you realize, okay, a person didn't make this. There's no humanity in this piece of art, if you want to even call it art. And
Bells and
and then
whistles, brother.
what's that?
Yeah, bells and whistles, brother. It's
Yeah,
like everything is it's all an illusion, man. It's all just like it's like the shiny object thing. Shiny
yeah,
objects, shiny objects.
yeah,
And it's so hard to I guess sift through all that shit when you do find some man. When you find Tom Waits, man, oh shit. You find something that's like, it's just a guy in a guitar and whatever. It's like,
yeah,
man, I crave that. I crave that in movies. I crave a good character study. By the way, man, side note, if you are a fan of cinema, I cannot recommend with any greater fortitude. Uh, Scorsese's new film is a fucking masterpiece, and it's a
oh cool.
must see. Killers of the Flower Moon is
I've been meaning to
mind blowing,
see it.
mind blowing film experience. Oppenheimer's pretty damn good too, but Killers of the Flower Moon really emotionally, historically beautiful, and artistically, what a piece of film.
Yeah, definitely have to check that out.
Oh yeah, that's what I miss, man.
Yeah.
I'm missing things that are real, and that interview that you did with Malcolm.
Oh.
Malcolm Bruce. I watched that earlier today, and right after that, I sent him a friend request on Facebook, and he accepted. And I'm gonna reach out to him. And like I said, I'd like to get to know that guy, because
Yeah.
I listened to a good portion of that interview you did, and he's a man after my heart for sure. And so much of what he was talking about is so true within the music industry, within just the way things work today. And man, it's hard to be. It was hard to be an indie artist back in the '90s. It's really hard to be an indie artist these days.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
Just it's we are beyond the matrix, people. It's crazy.
Yeah.
And so to have an original voice, really to have an original voice these days, it's becoming increasingly difficult, of course, because well, now you've got AI that's trying to take those original voices and make new original voices from them, and God knows where all that's going to go.
Yeah. It's rather horrifying.
Yeah, it is. And so I think it's going to become even more difficult to find those original voices in all the arts, in all the areas we want to have original voices. It's going to be difficult, more and more difficult to find them, just because the amount of stuff coming at us is going to continue to increase. If you have a world where AI can produce music at a pace that's faster than the music industry can produce it, I mean, what's going to happen? It's just going to get harder and harder to find decent stuff, or stuff that's made by real people.
Yeah, agreed.
It's terrifying. So yeah, keep the crusade, brother. Keep waving the flag for organic art.
Yes, definitely. Well, Eric, this has been amazing. I don't want to keep you all night. I do have one last question for you. And this is kind of the cheese question, the cheesy one. So as you know, my page is Brews and Tunes. I pair beer with mostly heavy metal records and hard rock and whatnot. So I'm going to put you on the spot. So it's a Friday night.
Gotcha.
And you're hanging out at home. What beer are you drinking? What album are you spinning? What is your pairing?
All right. Well, again, Paulana. Zero. Oops, sorry. Where's that camera? 0.0.
Oh, okay. Nice.
Drink responsibly, kids. And someone's filming me from the side over here. But I'm going to go on record and say, brother, as you can see, I enjoy. I've had even though I'm sitting here drinking the non-alcoholic blend, and I've had plenty of real beer in my life, and I just hit my quota a few years ago. My pancreas said no more alcohol for you. And long story short, I had a very serious, I've had serious bouts of alcoholism in my life, and so that's why I'm sitting here with the alcohol-free thing. But from one recovering alcoholic to anyone else out there, I can recommend an alternative, which is a much healthier alternative. And so my pairing would be a little bit of this and Dark Side of the Moon, which was released 50 years ago.
Nice.
This year. I got a few records that you could go that 1973, 50 years ago. Dark Side of the Moon goes great with this. Or any of your fine beers. Dark Side of the Moon, or you could go with David Bowie's Aladdin Sane, which also came out 50 years ago.
That's right.
This year. Elton John's Goodbye Yellow Brick Road is a pretty great record. I know it's not metal, but
it's a great album.
Sabbath, Bloody Sabbath. There you go. 50 years ago this year. Okay.
It's insane to think those albums are all that old.
I know. 50 years old. What's insane to think I have a record that's 30 years old, and then you're like, oh, well, I guess they could be 50 years old. It's
yeah.
crazy.
Yeah. That's wild. That is wild. Well, Eric, thank you so very much for chatting with me. This has been an absolute pleasure and an honor. And for those watching, please look in the description below. I've got links to Eric's page, as his Bandcamp page. You need to go, if you don't own 1,000 Scars, go buy it right now, this minute. As soon as you stop watching this, go purchase that, as well as the David Bowie tribute he did with his brother, Bowie Decade, which is also incredible. Both richly textured, beautiful albums. So go buy those right away. Again, Eric, thank you so very much.
Victor, thank you, my friend. God bless you. And yeah, look forward to talking to you again sometime, man.
Definitely.
Keep me posted when this thing's ready. Shoot me a link and I'll share it all over Facebook, and we'll get this out there. Okay,
Sounds good.
We'll grow your YouTube channel a little bit too.
Thank you. Awesome. That would be great.
Yeah.